It was a warm spring evening in 2012 when Elise Morgan stepped out of her modest home in Marlow, Ohio, for what was supposed to be just another quiet walk. She wore her worn-out windbreaker, slipped the house key onto her finger beside her wedding ring, and gently closed the front door behind her. No note, no phone, no goodbye. Her husband, Daniel, later told police she did this often walk to clear her head, especially when her thoughts became too loud. She called it quieting the static. He said during questioning, it helped her feel normal. But something about that night wasn't. He remembered the time exactly 6:40 p.m. because he just logged into a work video call when she left. He said she looked calm, peaceful, maybe a little distant, but nothing unusual. That's what he kept repeating, nothing unusual. By the next morning, Elise still hadn't returned. Daniel said he assumed she'd fallen asleep on the couch or stayed over at her sister Ruth's house, something she'd done before when she needed space. But the bed was untouched, the couch was empty, her windbreaker was gone, and her shoes weren't by the door. He called the police just after noon. The 911 operator asked why he'd waited so long. His reply was cold, "I thought she needed space." The call was recorded and later picked apart by online sleuths and journalists. His tone was eerily calm. To calm, the search began almost immediately. Police canvassed the neighborhood. Canine units were brought in. Flyers went up all over Marlow on mailboxes, storefronts, gas station doors. Elise's face, with her soft brown eyes and faint smile, became the face of a mystery that gripped the entire town. Volunteers poured in. Search teams combed the woods behind the church and followed the creek bed down to Thistle Road. A scent was picked up briefly, then vanished near the train tracks. The pond near the back of the church was drained, but nothing turned up. No clothing, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Elise Morgan had simply disappeared. The media latched on quickly. News vans crowded the curb. Headlines like "Marlow woman missing after evening walk" spread across local TV and online outlets. Daniel gave interviews. He stood in front of the camera with his hands folded, thanked volunteers, and handed out bottled water at the command post. But there was something off about him, something decomposed. Detective Sarah Avery, newly promoted and under pressure, took the lead. She was sharp, observant, and quiet. She noticed details others missed, like how Daniel's garage smelled overwhelmingly of bleach. Just 2 days after Elise vanished, people grieved differently. Her partner had said, "Yes," Avery replied, "but grief doesn't usually come with bleach." On data, Elise's younger sister Ruth arrived from Cincinnati. She didn't hug Daniel. She barely looked at him. Instead, she went straight to Elise's bedroom, sat on the unmade bed, and buried her face in Elise's scarf. Lavender, cinnamon, and something bitter. She wouldn't just walk away. Ruth insisted to Avery, "Not like that. Not without saying something." "What kind of state was she in lately?" Avery asked. "She was scared," Ruth whispered, "but not of being alone, of being watched." Flashbacks from their last phone call haunted Ruth. Elise saying things like, "I can't be myself around him anymore, and he always wants to know where I am." But Elise never named names, and now her silence stretched for miles. Weeks passed, then months. The town began to move on. The flyers faded, rain warped and sun bleached. People whispered at the diner when Daniel walked in. Some defended him. Others called him cold, even dangerous. Ruth stayed in town, running a Facebook group, printing new posters, calling journalists, anyone who'd listen. Daniel grew more withdrawn. He went back to work. He trimmed the lawn, but he never joined the searches. When asked, he said, "I needed normal again." On the 1-year anniversary, Ruth lit a candle at the old church behind which Elise had last been seen. Daniel didn't. No, he said he didn't believe in ceremonies. Ruth didn't believe in him. Years passed, and Elise became a name in old headlines. Her photo remained taped to Ruth's fridge. The police case went cold. Detective Avery was reassigned. Daniel eventually remarried. Ruth never stopped hoping. Then came year 13. A construction crew began renovations at the church foundation work beneath the back wall, the same area where Elise's scent had once gone cold. Just after lunch, a worker's shovel hit something solid, small, metal, wrapped in roots and dirt. Was a silver key cane, rusted but intact. Tag read, "EM." When the news hit, Ruth stood frozen, staring at the headline on her phone. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, in a cracked whisper, she said, "She was right here." All this time, police reopened the case, and somewhere beneath that same ground, beneath layers of silence and secrets, something long buried was beginning to stir. A soft breeze moved through the churchyard as candles flickered in front of Elise Morgan's photo. It was the one Ruth had picked, the one where Elise was smiling in the sunlight. Unaware that someone was taking her picture, the vigil had drawn a quiet crowd. Neighbors stood with bowed heads, hands clasped. No one spoke much, just whispers and sniffles. The town of Marlow had learned how to mourn without answers. Daniel stood at the front, a single candle in hand, eyes focused on the flame. He looked the part of the grieving husband, disheveled, hollow-eyed, grieving, but Ruth watched more closely than the others. She watched how his hands didn't tremble, how his eyes didn't water. "I'd like to say something," he finally said, stepping forward. The mic feeding a soft hum through the speakers. She was light in my life. He paused. She was my Elisa. I mean, Elise. That slip, that moment. Ruth's eyes narrowed. Daniel cleared his throat quickly and kept going, rambling about love and loss and how the world felt dimmer. But Ruth couldn't hear the rest. The fumbled name echoed in her head. Lisa. That wasn't a mispronunciation, it was distance. It was detachment. After the vigil, people lingered. They hugged Daniel. They offered casserole. They whispered sympathy. Ruth stayed by the candles. She didn't go to him. Not yet. Instead, she stared at Elise's photo, remembering the final conversation they'd had. It had been a Thursday night. Rain tapped gently on Ruth's kitchen window while Elise sat at the table, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. Her fingers kept tracing the rim of the mug, over and over, like she couldn't sit still. "He doesn't like when I laugh hard," Elise said quietly. "What do you mean?" "He watches me," she whispered. "Even in the house. He'll come into the room just to check what I'm doing. Says I leave things in the wrong place. That I'm careless, like I'm trying to upset him." Ruth felt a chill. "That's not okay, Liz. That's not normal." "I know," Elise replied, voice tight. "But he always makes me feel like I'm the one losing it." Ruth hadn't told anyone about that night. Not then. She didn't want to make things worse. Elise had asked her not to. "I just need a little time to figure it out," she had said. But now time was frozen, and Elise was gone. Ruth lit a fresh candle after the vigil ended. The flame rose and flickered in the dusk. A shadow passed behind her. It was Daniel. "She hated this stuff," he said, his voice low. "What stuff?" Ruth asked. "The attention, the drama. She was private. This would have embarrassed her." Ruth didn't answer. She watched the flame. Daniel stepped beside her. "I know you blame me." Ruth didn't look at him. "Should I?" Daniel paused, then said softly, "You're not the only one who lost her." Ruth turned to face him finally. "You didn't lose her. You let her disappear." For the first time, a crack appeared in his expression, but it vanished just as fast. He walked away without another word. That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his speech. The way he said her name wrong. The way he had stood without flinching. Elise used to talk about how she and Daniel had drifted, that he'd become cold, possessive, the way he always had to know where she was. She opened her old email and searched for any unread messages from Elise. There was one dated a month before she vanished. Subject: "Can I stay with you for a while?" Message: "Things are tense. I'll explain more soon. Don't tell anyone I asked." Ruth had responded too late. The next morning, Ruth drove to the police station. She asked to speak with Detective Avery again. "Something's not right," she told her. "He's too calm." It's like she was already gone in his mind. Avery nodded slowly. "We've been watching him. Quietly. There's not enough for a warrant. Not yet." "She came to me before she disappeared," Ruth whispered. She was scared of him. "Do you have anything concrete?" Avery asked. Ruth hesitated. "No. Just instincts, but that should count for something." Avery looked tired, worn down. "Instincts matter, but we need evidence." Later that afternoon, Ruth went to Elise's house. Daniel wasn't home. She walked the perimeter, looking for something, anything, a gut feeling, a clue. The wind stirred leaves across the porch. The windows reflected her face back at her. Nothing moved. She stared at the front step for a long time. That was where Elise had stood last, where her shoes had touched concrete, where the static in her head had finally pushed her to leave. Ruth stood in the exact spot and closed her eyes. She imagined Elise stepping forward, past the mailbox, past the oak tree, toward the church. And then gone. That night, Ruth made a promise. She would not let Elise become a cold case. She would not let Daniel fade back into comfort. She would not let the town forget. Something had happened, and she was going to uncover it even if it broke her. As Ruth gathered her notes, Detective Avery sat at her desk, staring at a file she'd overlooked, an unopened journal. collected from Elise's room during the initial search. She flipped it open. Inside was a single line on the first page: "If something happens to me, start here." Detective Sarah Avery had been a cop for 13 years, but this was her first major missing persons case as lead. She'd requested Marlowe for its quiet pace, its neat streets, its predictability. Elise Morgan's disappearance shattered that illusion within a week. The morning after Ruth's visit, Avery sat at her desk staring at an evidence log, coffee cold, eyes red. The file in front of her was thin, too thin. No crime scene, no body, no physical evidence, just a woman who vanished into nothing. It gnawed at her. She turned to the cardboard box marked Morgan, Elise. Personal effects. It had been collected from the house on day 4 and left mostly untouched. The initial sweep had turned up nothing suspicious, but Avery had a gut feeling. Maybe they'd missed something. She dug through the contents: a phone charger, half used, journal, a necklace, a paperback novel. Then she paused. The journal. It wasn't the one Elise usually wrote in. Based on Ruth's description, this one was older, with cracked leather binding and stiff pages. It had a faint lavender scent. She opened it. The first page read, "If something happens to me, start here." Avery's stomach dropped. She flipped quickly through the next few pages. Most were blank, but page 7 had a passage, scrawled in shaky penmanship. "He watches. He sleep now. I pretend I don't know. He says I lose things just to make him angry. I think he's hiding my things to make me feel crazy. I don't feel safe. I'm not safe." Avery cursed under her breath. This should have been found immediately. Why had no one read this before? She pulled out the intake report. The journal had been cataloged but not reviewed. It had slipped through. Her mistake. Later that afternoon, she sat across from Ruth in the quiet of the station's interview room. She slid the journal across the table. "I missed it," Avery said plainly. "We all did." Ruth picked up the journal with trembling hands. She didn't speak for several seconds. "Then this changes everything." Avery nodded. "Yes, and means Elise was afraid enough to leave this behind in case she didn't come back." Ruth's voice broke. She knew. That night, Avery reopened the case file. This time, she didn't skim. She read every word, every report, every timestamp. She called the officer who had interviewed Daniel the night Elise was reported missing. "Did he ever ask about the search?" She asked. "No," the officer said. "He just asked if he was a suspect." Avery sighed. "And you told him that everyone's a suspect until they're not." He hung up and jotted a note, concerned more about himself than her. She flipped through the crime scene photos. Elise's bedroom, neat and untouched. The living room, to clean. The garage bleached. Why would someone bleach a garage unless there was something to hide? The next morning, Avery went back to the Morgan house unannounced. Daniel answered in sweatpants and a forced smile. "Detective," he said, holding the door. "Is this about the cocaine? We're still evaluating." She replied, stepping inside. "I need to look at the garage again." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Follow up," she said casually. "Standard." He didn't protest, but his eyes narrowed slightly. As they entered the garage, Avery looked around. It was spotless, organized shelves, fresh paint on the far wall, no trace of anything. She pointed. "Was that wall recently redone?" Daniel shrugged. "Couple years ago. Water damage." Avery nodded, pretending to jot notes, but her mind was racing. If something had happened in this house, the garage was the place. Too much time had passed. Still, something about Daniel's energy made her skin crawl. Back at the station, she sat with Officer Lynn, her most trusted colleague. "I think we're looking at a staged cleanup," she said. Lynn frowned. 13 years ago, she disappeared without a trace. He bleached the garage 2 days later. Now we find her cocaine buried behind a church. He's connected. I can feel it. "Feelings, not evidence," Lynn reminded gently. "I know," she said, "but now we have a journal. Still circumstantial." She leaned back. "Unless we can prove that garage was the dump site." That evening, Avery drove to the edge of Thistle Creek Road, where Elise's scent had last been tracked. She walked slowly, retracing the original search grid. Grass had grown back, and the trees were heavier now, older. Still, something about the path felt wrong. She stopped near a rusted wire fence behind the church grounds. Just on the other side was where the cocaine had been found. She pictured Elise walking this route, maybe nervous, maybe planning to meet someone, maybe trying to escape. Was she lured or followed? She returned to the journal that night, reading every word. Page 11. "I told him I was meeting Ruth, but he got angry. Said Ruth was trying to turn me against him. I didn't tell him the truth. I was meeting someone else. Who, the journal didn't say. The entry ended abruptly. Avery circled the phrase. This was no random walk. Elise had plans that night. Someone, maybe not just Daniel, didn't want her to go through with them. She met Ruth again the next morning at the coffee shop off Main. Did Elise ever mention anyone else? Avery asked gently. A friend, a man, anyone she confided in besides you. Ruth hesitated. She hinted once that there was someone she could talk to. I assumed it was a therapist. Do you know a name? No. Ruth whispered. She never said, but she seemed lighter, like she had hope again. Avery tapped her pen on the table. We need to find that person. Back at the station, Avery stared at the whiteboard filled with Elise's timeline. A name began forming in her mind, one not yet spoken aloud. She picked up the old email printouts Ruth had provided. Cross-referenced an IP address with church Wi-Fi logs from 13 years ago. One name appeared twice. Jonas Mercer. She froze. The church's old youth counselor. Gone from Marlow 3 weeks before Elise disappeared. As Avery prepared to reopen leads on Jonas Mercer, a quiet knock echoed at the station's front desk. A young man, tall, hesitant, nervous, stood holding a worn notebook in his hand. My name's Noah Reyes, he said. I live next to Elise. There's something I never told anyone. I think I saw her the night she disappeared. The boy at the station looked nervous, like someone holding a truth that had grown too heavy. He wore a gray hoodie and clutched a spiral notebook to his chest like it was armor. My name's Noah Reyes, he said quietly. I used to live next to the Morgans. I saw something the night Elise disappeared. Detective Avery motioned him inside. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. After 13 years of silence, this could be nothing or everything. Noah sat on the edge of his chair, fingers tapping the notebook. I never told anyone. I was 13 then, scared. My parents didn't want me involved. Avery nodded. You're safe now. Just tell me what you remember. Noah's voice trembled. It was just after dark. I was on my bike, circling the block like I always did. I saw Mrs. Morgan walking. Where was she? By the church, near the back. Wait, but she wasn't alone. Avery leaned forward. Who was with her? I don't know, Noah admitted. He wore black. Hoodie pulled up. He had something in his hand, like a small bag, or maybe a book. Avery's pen paused. Did you see them talk? Yeah, Noah said. She seemed upset. She kept looking over her shoulder. Did you hear anything? No, but she didn't want to be seen. Noah opened his notebook. Inside was a drawing, faint pencil marks from years ago, to figures near the church. One taller, one slouched. I drew it that night. I thought I saw something wrong, but my dad said to forget it, that it wasn't our business. Avery stared at the sketch, chills running down her spine. You said you saw this near the back gate of the church? Yeah, where the dumpsters used to be, before they moved them. That was the same area where Elise's cocaine had been found. Avery looked at him. Why now, Noah? He bit his lip. Because I keep dreaming about it, about her face. I feel like she's still waiting for someone to say what happened. Avery placed her hand gently on the table. You just did. She pulled up church security logs from 2012, hoping for a miracle. But they had long been deleted. Still, the description gnawed at her. A hooded figure, a secret meeting, and a woman who disappeared hours later. Could that man have been Jonas Mercer? She called the church's current pastor. Do you have old staff records? Not much, he said. But we've got a few boxes in storage. Inside one dusty box, a faded staff directory. And there he was, Jonas Mercer, youth counselor. Last employed in May 2012, abruptly left town. No forwarding address. Avery scanned the page. A photo of him smiling, wearing the same black hoodie. The coincidence was too much. She ran his name through every database she had. Nothing flagged. No criminal record, no charges. Just a man who disappeared, like Elise. Later that night, she sat with Ruth in her living room. Elise's candle burning softly on the windowsill. There was someone else, Avery said. Ruth nodded slowly. I knew it. She had someone. She just never told me who. I think it was Jonas Mercer. Ruth's expression froze. I remember him. She said finally. He counseled her after their miscarriage. She trusted him. Too much, Avery asked. Ruth shook her head. Not in that way. He was gentle, quiet. But she felt like Daniel hated him. Why? She said Daniel once found them talking in the church garden. After that, he made her quit counseling. The cases were moving fast now. A woman afraid of her husband, a counselor she trusted. A secret meeting at night. And a boy who saw her alive, speaking to a man in black. Avery requested records from Jonas Mercer's last known address. The landlord confirmed he had broken his lease and left mid-month 3 weeks before Elise vanished. When asked why, the landlord said, he said someone was watching him, back at the church grounds. Avery returned to the Kay Kane site. She crouched low near the unearthed dirt, where Elise's keys had been found. She traced the area with her flashlight. The church had moved the dumpsters, but the concrete slab beneath still bore a faint crack. As she followed the crack, her light stopped on a small metal object embedded in the dirt wall. She reached in carefully, a rusted necklace clasped. She bagged it. Forensics would take time, but Avery felt it. Jonas was key. The problem was, no one knew where he was. She stood in the darkening churchyard, wind tugging her coat, and whispered, "Jonas, where did you go?" Because if he was running, it wasn't just from fear. It was from something he'd seen or done. The morning air was thick with fog as Detective Avery stood at the edge of the church property, staring out toward the overgrown trail that hadn't been walked in years. Behind her, the old cracked sidewalk split into two narrow dirt paths, one leading to the cemetery, the other toward the forest. Locals called it the crossroads. Avery had learned from the church pastor that this spot had once been a gathering place for evening walks, prayer circles, and youth group activities. Elise had passed by here dozens of times, the last night anyone saw her. She may have come here on purpose. She stepped carefully onto the right path, her boots crunching dead leaves. Birds stirred above her, but the woods were quiet, still, watching. She paused at a crooked wooden post leaning out of the earth. A small iron bell once hung from it, now rusted and broken. This was where the kids would ring it to signal the start of group meetings. She stared at the ground beneath the post. The soil looked disturbed. She crouched, brushing away the top layer. Her gloves, a few pieces of glass green, shattered, maybe from a bottle, a lighter, ashes. Someone had been here. Avery flagged the area for a team to dig. Back at the station, she reviewed Elise's phone records again. Most of the calls were to Ruth, but one number stood out: repeated, frequent, always around the same time. She traced it. The number had belonged to the church office in 2012. Specifically, Jonas Mercer's line. Avery sat back, heart thudding. Elise had been calling Jonas regularly, right up until the day she vanished. She pulled Elise's journal back out, flipped to the dog-eared page. He says, "I'm trying to provoke him." That talking to Jonas is betrayal, but Jonas listens. He doesn't question my memory. He believes me. Elise had been scared of her own husband, but she'd trusted Jonas, which meant either Jonas helped her escape or something went wrong. Avery called the only surviving elder from the church's 2012 board, a quiet man named Bishop Keller, now retired in Indiana. She asked about Jonas Mercer. There was silence on the other end of the line. Jonas was a good man, Keller said. Daniel Morgan didn't like him, complained about him a lot. Did something happen between them? Jonas asked too many questions. Daniel wanted his wife to stay quiet. That matched Elise's journal exactly. Avery visited the archives room that afternoon. She requested all files tied to Jonas Mercer's departure. The church's letter of resignation was handwritten, calm, polite. But then Avery noticed a small attached note from the former pastor. Jonas left suddenly, seemed afraid, mentioned something about being followed, claimed he saw Elise's husband watching him during service. Avery felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. Jonas had been frightened. Daniel had been watching him. Elise had been stuck between them. If Jonas knew something, where had he gone? She searched again. No driver's license renewal, no job history, no social media. But then she found something strange. A property tax listing from rural Kentucky. A cabin listed under JM Holdings, bought 2 months after Jonas vanished. Avery called Ruth. Did Elise ever mention Kentucky? She said she wanted to disappear into the woods sometimes. Ruth replied. She used to say, "If I could just run, I'd go south, somewhere with trees, somewhere no one would find me." Avery packed a bag and drove. 6 hours later, she stood before an old cabin at the end of a gravel path. Ivy covered half the structure. The door was locked, but no lights showed inside. She knocked, waited. Nothing. She circled to the back and saw a small shed with cracked windows, a generator inside, unplugged. Dust everywhere, but the side door of the cabin had a single muddy footprint, small, fresh. Someone had been there recently. She contacted local sheriff deputies. Their help, they got a warrant and returned at dawn. Inside the cabin were canned goods, survival gear, and 2 old framed photos, one of Jonas. And one of Elise. Avery stood frozen. She walked further into the room and found a small cot with a journal resting on it. She flipped it open. First page. She wanted to leave. I tried to help, but I was too late. Each page that followed was filled with guilt, fear, descriptions of a night Jonas couldn't forget. She said he would hurt her, that he had before. She said she had a plan, but I didn't go with her. I told her to meet me behind the church. I waited, but she never came. Avery closed the journal, hands shaking. Jonas hadn't hurt her. He tried to help her run, but something stopped her from making it to him. She stepped outside. Sun piercing through branches now. At the crossroads in Marlow, someone had burned something and buried something. And maybe covered something up. She picked up her phone and called the forensics unit back at the church site. What did you find beneath the soil? She asked. There was a pause. Detective, you need to come see for yourself. Avery's heart dropped. She ended the call and turned the car north. Back to Marlow, back to where it all started. Detective Avery's boots sank into the softened ground behind the church as morning dew clung to the yellow tape flapping in the wind. She had barely stepped out of her car when a forensics officer waved her over, his face tight. We found something, he said. Avery followed him through the brush to the spot where the soil had been disturbed. The team had been digging all night under artificial lights, inch by inch, careful not to damage anything hidden beneath. At first, they found the glass and scorched wood, then the rusted clasp, now something deeper. The forensics officer knelt and pointed at a pale object, barely visible through the dirt. It was long, curved, human, a rib. Avery crouched, heart thudding. How many? We're still counting. There's more, a partial skeleton, female, shallow burial, less than 3 feet deep. Avery stared at the exposed bone. Can we confirm it's Elise? Too early, he said, but we found this too. He handed her a torn piece of faded fabric blue with a faint floral pattern. Ruth had once told her Elise's favorite scarf was sky blue with tiny flowers stitched in white. Avery didn't speak. She simply closed her eyes and breathed. 13 years. And the earth still remembered. A shiver slid down her spine. The location just behind the church, 20 feet from the back gate. Near the place Noah had described. The same place Jonas Mercer had waited for Elise. She hadn't made it to him. Something had stopped her right here. The team unearthed more bones by noon. A broken wrist, a crushed jaw, parts of the skull, caved in unnaturally. The wounds weren't accidental. Blunt force trauma. Someone had hit her hard, more than once. This was no accident. No fall, no animal attack. This was rage. This was murder. Avery stood, fists clenched. Preserve everything. No leaks to press. I want every inch of this dirt sifted. Her voice was sharp. No room for error now. Inside the church, Avery sat on a bench near the stained glass window, sunlight casting fractured reds and blues across her notepad. She wrote down everything: Noah's sighting, Jonas's journal, the call logs, the scarf, the rib, the jaw, and Daniel Morgan, Elise's husband, the one man who never searched, who bleached his garage, who slipped up at the vigil, who had motive. Now, proximity. He lived just 3 blocks away when Elise vanished, and the burial site. Somewhere he passed every morning on his jog. She remembered Ruth's words. He didn't lose her. He let her disappear. Avery called Ruth. We found remains, she said softly. There was silence. Then a breath. Then, is it her? We're not sure yet, but we found her scarf. Ruth didn't cry. Not at first. Her voice turned hollow. I told you she was right here. All this time. I walked past her every week. I prayed near her. Avery wanted to say something comforting, but there was nothing. Only the quiet howl of justice moving slowly. She hung up and returned to the station. Daniel Morgan was already waiting. He stood at the front desk, arms crossed, feigning calm. I heard there's digging behind the church, he said. Someone. Tell me why you're searching that dirt after 13 years. Avery kept her expression unreadable. Who told you? Someone from the town council, he said. It's not exactly a secret. Maybe it should be. Avery said. You seem nervous. Daniel scoffed. Don't insult me. You think I buried my wife in a churchyard. You lived 3 blocks away. She was last seen walking in that direction. The boy across the street saw her meeting someone behind the gate. Not me, he snapped. I was home. Alone, Avery reminded him. And your garage, it smelled like bleach 2 days later. I cleaned up oil, he said. That's not a crime. No, Avery agreed. But murder is. Daniel's face tightened. Do you have a warrant? He asked. Not yet, she said, but I will. He turned and stormed out. Avery stared after him, the weight of 13 years pressing down like fog. Back at her desk, she opened Jonas Mercer's journal again, one sentence on the back page caught her eye. I heard her scream. I started to run, but by the time I reached the back gate, it was silent again. Jonas had lied. He hadn't just waited. He had heard something, and then he ran. She scanned his notes again. I saw movement, a man. I think it was him, but I can't be sure. Jonas saw someone near the body and vanished weeks later. Was it fear or guilt? Either way, Avery needed him. She called the sheriff's office in Kentucky. No one seen Jonas in over a week, the deputy said. We checked his cabin, empty. Avery felt something twist in her gut. He was running again. She pulled the image of Elise's scar from the evidence log. Thread pattern matched perfectly with one Ruth had described in photos. Forensics had matched the jawbone to Elise's dental records by morning. It was her. They found Elise, and she had been just 20 feet from safety. The next step was justice. Avery called the DA. We have a body. We have motive. We have a journal. I want a warrant for Daniel Morgan's home and the garage. Are you prepared to charge him? The DA asked. Not yet, she said, but I will be, that night. Avery stood once again at the burial site. The soil was turned, but now it told the truth. Elise had been silenced here. But the ground never forgot. The search warrant came through just after sunrise. Detective Avery didn't wait. She arrived at Daniel Morgan's home with 3 officers, all silent as they approached the faded red brick house where Elise once lived and died in silence. Daniel opened the door wearing a robe, his jaw tight. You're making a mistake, he muttered, stepping aside. Let's hope so, Avery replied. She scanned the living room first, neat to neat, a blanket folded with military precision. Not a speck of dust, a home polished for outsiders, but she wasn't here for the furniture. Where's the garage entrance? Daniel gestured toward the back. You won't find anything. Avery didn't answer. Her boots echoed across the tiled floor as she stepped into the garage. She stood in the center of the room, staring at the concrete. It was spotless, sterile. Paint afresh for a space this old. The chemical smell still lingered faintly, like bleach trapped in the pores of the wall. She knelt near the far corner and ran her fingers along the baseboard. A tiny crack. She tapped. Hollow. Her heart picked up. Get me ground-penetrating radar, she said to the officer beside her. While the team assembled equipment, Avery paced the space, retracing Elise's final days. This was where Daniel worked. This was where Elise had said she wasn't allowed to enter his space. She once told Ruth. He locks it when he's angry. She looked up. The ceiling beams were thick and uneven. One corner beam had initials carved into it. M. Elise Morgan had been here, and she had wanted someone to know. The radar swept across the floor. Nothing. Then a sharp blip near the wall. Void beneath the concrete, an uneven shape. Avery leaned in. What is that? The tech frowned. Could be a hidden box. Could be a vent. It's not standard. We're breaking it within minutes. The officers had jackhammers buzzing. Daniel protested from the doorway. You can't just destroy my house. Avery didn't look at him. She lived here. She disappeared here, and now we found her dead. The first layer cracked. Dust flew. Then the second. Finally metal. A tin lockbox, wedged between beams and covered in plastic. Avery pulled it out carefully. It wasn't locked. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Elise smiling. Elise sleeping. Elise in the backyard, unaware. Every photo was taken from a distance, secretly. One had a date on the back, May 19, 2012, the night before she vanished. Avery's breath hitched. She turned to Daniel. You stalked her, she said. His face went pale. No. I was trying to protect her. From what? She snapped. From being happy. She was leaving me. He hissed. She was changing. She was afraid. He didn't respond. She opened another envelope from the box. Inside hair, a single blonde strand, carefully wrapped. A keepsake. Control. Madness. The silence in the room became suffocating. She loved someone else. Daniel whispered. You knew? He nodded. I followed her once. She met someone. They were laughing. Jonas Mercer. He didn't answer, but his expression confirmed it. She was going to run. Daniel muttered. I heard her on the phone. Said she was meeting him. So you followed her. He looked away. Avery took a step forward. Did you confront her? Still silence. She stepped closer. Did you kill her? His hands trembled, just slightly. She made me invisible, he said, like I didn't exist. The room fell cold. Outside, An officer called Avery. We found something else. In the basement crawl space. He followed quickly. At the base of the stairs, behind a water heater. The officer pointed to a wooden panel. He pried it open. Inside were burned pages. Avery used tweezers to lift them out. They were partially legible. Dear Ruth, if you're reading this, then something happened. I was going to leave. I was scared. I think he knows. The ink had melted around the edges, but the words were clear. Elise had written a goodbye. Avery folded the letter slowly. Get him out of here. The officers cuffed Daniel without resistance. He didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't ask for a lawyer. He just stared at the floor. As if the floor still whispered her name. At the station, Avery laid out the evidence on AWHITEBOARD. Photos, journal, letter, hair, location, motive, timeline. And now a confession without words. She met Ruth that evening in the church courtyard. The sun was setting, golden light slanting through the trees. It was him, Avery said. Ruth didn't speak. She stared at the candle she lit every Sunday for her sister. I knew it. She whispered, but a part of me hoped it wasn't true. He watched her, Avery said. For months, took pictures, collected things. Then the night she tried to leave, he followed. He couldn't stand losing her, Ruth said. Avery looked at the sky, but he never really had her. They stood in silence, surrounded by wind and memory. Back at the house, the excavation continued. Forensics found another item, Elise's phone, wrapped in foil and buried beneath the garage. Its battery was dead. Screen cracked. But the SIM card was intact. They extracted the final messages, a draft never sent. Jonas, I'm scared. I think Daniel followed me last time. Meet me behind the church. Don't be late. If I don't come, something's happened. Avery printed the message and tacked it to the board. Justice had come too late to save Elise. But it had finally arrived, and now it would speak for her. The interrogation room smelled faintly of old coffee and bleach. A single camera blinked in the corner. The walls were pale gray, like the face of the man seated in the metal chair. Daniel Morgan sat with his wrists cuffed to a loop in the table. His head was tilted down, eyes fixed on the scratched surface. Detective Avery entered. Calm and deliberate, she placed a folder on the table. Photos slid out slowly. Elise's scarf, the burned letter, the secret photographs from the garage box. Daniel glanced at them but said nothing. Avery sat across from him. Her voice was steady. This is the moment you tell the truth. He didn't look up. I've already told you everything I remember, he muttered. No, Avery replied. You told me a version you hoped would sound sane. He blinked once. Slowly, we found her, Daniel. She said. She was right behind the church. Less than a 5-minute walk from your house. I didn't know that. But you knew she was leaving you. His lips pressed together. You followed her. He flinched slightly. I was trying to stop her. Avery leaned forward. From doing what? Daniel swallowed hard. From making a mistake. You think Elise leaving you was a mistake? He didn't answer. Avery pulled out one more photo. Elise's partially unearthed skull. Fractured side where she'd been hit. Was this part of stopping her? Daniel closed his eyes. I didn't mean to. That was the first crack. You hit her, Avery said quietly. He stayed silent. You followed her. You confronted her. What did she say? She lied. He snapped, finally lifting his head. She told me it was just Ruth she was meeting, but I knew she was running to him, Jonas. Daniel nodded slowly. He got into her head, said I was unstable, said she needed help. She did need help. She needed structure. Daniel said sharply, she needed me. Avery stayed calm. What happened behind the church, Daniel? He breathed slowly, shoulders tight. She saw me, he whispered. She looked scared. Said I was ruining everything. And then, I grabbed her arm. I told her to come home. She refused. She said she wasn't mine anymore. He looked away, jaw clenched. That's when I lost it. He didn't cry, but something shifted in his voice. She tried to run past me. I pushed her. She fell, hit her head, and then, he paused. I thought she was dead, but she moved, crawled. Avery stared, her chest tight. I picked up rock, Daniel said. I didn't think. He stopped, biting the inside of his cheek. I didn't mean to kill her, he said. Too late. Avery folded her hands. You did. Daniel slumped in the chair. I panicked, dragged her off the path, covered her with whatever I could find. Dirt, leaves. Why behind the church? He shrugged, broken. It was dark. No one would think to look there, but someone did. He didn't respond. You went home, cleaned yourself up, and bleached your garage. He nodded faintly. You kept her phone, her hair, her scarf. He didn't deny it. Why? He looked at her. Because I wanted to remember her before she changed, before she stopped loving me. She never stopped, Avery said. She was just afraid. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes blank. She promised forever. You broke that promise. Not her. Avery stood and signaled the officer outside. Daniel didn't resist as they took him away. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just walked out, eyes glazed. Avery stayed behind, staring at the photo of Elise's fractured jaw. Ruth was waiting outside the station. Did he talk? She asked. Yes, Avery said. He confessed. Ruth's shoulders sagged. I don't know what I feel. That's normal, Avery said gently. Relief comes later. Right now, it's just grief. I used to think she was out there, Ruth whispered. Living, maybe hiding, maybe afraid. She was close the whole time. I walked past that church every Sunday. I prayed on top of her. Her voice broke. I'm sorry, Avery said. Ruth wiped her tears. He didn't deserve her. No, Avery agreed, but justice does. That night, Avery sat at her desk and typed the official report. Name of suspect, Daniel Morgan. Charge, murder in the first degree. Victim, Elise Morgan. Date of disappearance, May 20th, 2012. Date of recovery, August 16, 2025. Motive, jealousy, control, fear of abandonment. She printed it and signed her name. The final sentence read, case reclassified. Closed, with confession. But it didn't feel closed. Not really. Avery stared at Elise's journal, still resting on her shelf. There were more entries. More pain. More things unsaid. She flipped to a blank page and wrote. She was brave. She tried to leave, and though he silenced her, she never stopped speaking. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and in the silence of the night, the wind moved softly through the trees like a whisper that finally someone had listened. The envelope arrived at the station 3 days after Daniel's confession. No return address. No markings beyond Avery's name, written in careful, almost trembling cursive. The envelope was heavy. A single sheet of cream-colored paper folded inside, along with a small photograph. Avery unfolded it slowly. It was Jonas Mercer, standing beside Elise, both smiling, both unaware of the camera. Behind them, the church gates blurred in soft spring sunlight. Avery turned the photo over. March 14, 2012. Beneath it, the letter. She read it slowly, her hands cold despite the heat of the office. Detective Avery, if you are reading this, then I assume Elise has finally been found. I never knew if I'd have the courage to send this. For years, I wanted to forget. Wanted to disappear into the woods, like the guilt might rot away with time, but it didn't. It grew louder. I didn't kill Elise. I would never harm her. I loved her, though I never told her. I didn't need to. She already knew. She trusted me with things she never told anyone else. Her dreams, her fears, the way Daniel watched her, the way he made her question her own memory. I tried to help. I did, but I failed. Avery blinked and continued reading. On the night she disappeared, we were supposed to meet. I told her to come behind the church, near the old garden. She said she was ready, that she packed a small bag, that she'd written Ruth a goodbye letter she'd leave beneath the candle drawer in the hallway. I stood near the gate, waiting. The wind picked up. I remember the trees bending, the bell clanging faintly in the dark. I waited almost an hour. Then I heard it, a scream. Avery ripped the edges of the paper. I ran toward the sound, but I was too late. I saw movement, someone tall, someone angry. I couldn't see clearly. Only shadows. I should have gone after them, should have called the police, but I froze. I found nothing but broken branches, her scarf, a dark patch in dirt. I waited until morning, thinking she might come back. She never did. He had known. All these years, I left town the next day. Not because I was guilty of murder, but because I couldn't bear being the one who failed her. I kept her scarf. I kept the photo. I even kept the voice message she left on my phone, a tiny, trembling voice asking me if I thought she was making a mistake. She wasn't. Leaving him was the bravest thing she ever did. Avery closed her eyes. This wasn't just. It was grief. Silent, unprocessed, heavy as stone. I tried to reach out once, years later. I called Ruth, but I hung up before she answered. What'd I say? I'm the man who was supposed to save her. That line sounds cruel when spoken aloud. Avery reached the final paragraph. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope, now that Ruth is out, she can finally rest. I don't know if I'll ever return to Marlowe, but I buried the photo so it wouldn't burn with my cowardice. Thank you for finding her. And thank you for listening. Jonas Mercer. The letter ended without a date. Avery stared at the signature. The loop in the J curling downward, like a carried weight. She pressed the photo to her chest. Then stood. That afternoon, she drove to Ruth's house. She handed her the letter without a word. Ruth read it slowly. Her hands trembled halfway through. She didn't cry. She held the photo instead. They were good together, she whispered. I think he loved her, Avery said. I know he did. Do you hate him? Ruth looked up, her eyes full of hollow tears. No, she said. I hate that she didn't get to choose. Daniel took that from her. Avery nodded. I'm going to release a statement, she said. Let the town know the truth. Ruth looked at her. Will they care? They will now. That evening, Avery stood in front of the press. Behind her, the courthouse loomed tall and indifferent. We've officially closed the case of Elise Morgan's disappearance. Remains were recovered behind Marlow First Baptist Church last week and identified through dental records. Her husband, Daniel Morgan, has confessed and will be charged with first-degree murder, the reporters leaned. Elise did not run away. She did not leave town. She was taken, silenced, and buried within the very community that claimed to love her. Flashes erupted. Pens scratched furiously. Avery paused before finishing. This case isn't just about closure. It's about truth, no matter how long it takes to come to light. As the cameras clicked, Avery stepped back. She had done her job. But the ache remained. That night, in her apartment, she opened Elise's journal one last time. The final blank page stared back. Avery picked up her pen and wrote, Your story was never forgotten. You were never alone. And now, the whole world knows what he tried to bury. Outside her window, a soft wind rustled the trees, like a whisper, like gratitude. Like goodbye. The morning fog clung low to the ground as Ruth walked alone toward the old church garden. It had rained the night before. The soil was damp. The gate squeaking softly in the breeze as she pushed it open. She had avoided this place for over a decade. Now it pulled her in. The flowers were long gone. Benches warped, but beneath the decay, Ruth saw it clearly. This was the last place Elise had walked before she vanished, 13 years of not knowing. Now the ground had finally spoken. Detective Avery stood beside the memorial plaque installed near the rear wall. Her coat collar turned up against the chill. She liked this garden, Ruth said, not looking at her. She used to come here just to breathe. She wasn't running away, Avery replied. She was reaching for air. Ruth nodded, her eyes scanning the edges of the garden path. She never had a chance. She whispered. She tried. That matters. Avery's voice was calm, but beneath it was heat, anger not yet settled. The town had begun the slow process of reckoning. News vans were gone, but whispers still filled grocery aisles and church pews. No one could look Ruth in the eye for long. A small fence now surrounded the burial site. Inside it, flowers had been left by strangers. Notes, ribbons, a few tiny candles still flickered from the previous night's vigil. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Jonas hasn't come back, Ruth said after a long silence. He may not, Avery replied. Some people carry their guilt until it breaks them. I don't blame him, Ruth said. Not anymore. Avery nodded. She didn't say it aloud, but she still hoped Jonas would return, not just for closure, but because she believed he knew more than he admitted. There were gaps in his story. Things unsaid, things to carefully omitted. The kind of silence that doesn't come from fear, but from knowing too much. Have you listened to the voice message again? Avery asked. Every night. Ruth said. I keep hearing her say, if I don't come, something's happened. That line doesn't leave you. No, Ruth said softly. It haunts. Avery stared at the trees behind the church. Elise had walked that path. She had passed that fence. She had stood beneath the bell tower. And somewhere between hope and terror, she had been stopped. The wind stirred. Leaves rattled like paper. Back at the station, the evidence board remained. Daniel Morgan was in county lockup, awaiting formal indictment. His confession was on record. Forensics had matched the blood traces found on the garage floor to Elise. But Avery wasn't ready to declare it finished. Not yet. There were pieces that still didn't add up. Like the strange fibers found beneath Elise's fingernails. Not from Daniel's clothing. Not from Elise's scarf. And the second set of prints near the shallow grave, too degraded to match. Too real to ignore. She opened the file marked suppressed, pending clarity. Inside were her personal notes. One read, if Daniel acted alone, who else fled the scene? She stared at that line for a long time. Daniel had confessed. He said he struck Elise with a rock, but what if he wasn't alone? What if someone else helped cover it up? Or worse, someone else watched? The thought twisted in her stomach. Back at the church, Ruth walked slowly round the outer edge of the memorial. Her fingers brushed the fence post. She paused. There, beneath the mud, a glint. She bent and dug with her hands. Avery heard her gasp. She rushed over. Ruth stood holding a key, old, rusted, with a faded ribbon still tied through the loop. Valises? Avery asked. I think so, Ruth whispered. She used to keep this on her diary lock. Avery's pulse kicked up. Where's the diary? I haven't seen it in years. She kept it in a hollowed-out book. Something about hiding thoughts in plain sight. Avery straightened. If that key survived 13 years buried, maybe the diary did too. She made a call to the evidence team. 2 hours later, the crawlspace beneath the Morgan home was reopened. Deeper this time, they found a sealed tin box, wrapped in plastic. Inside, a hollowed-out copy of Wuthering Heights, and inside that, Elise's diary. Its pages were damp, some warped beyond reading, but others remained intact. The final entries were chilling. Daniel watches me in silence now. He doesn't yell anymore, just stares. He took my scarf and didn't give it back. I think someone else is coming to the garden when I'm not there. Ruth says I'm paranoid, but the gate swings at night. Avery read the lines out loud. Ruth grew pale. Elise was afraid of more than just Daniel. She whispered. She was being followed, Avery said. Maybe by more than one person. The diary mentioned footsteps, scraping outside her window. The sound of her name whispered in the hallway, and one entry stood alone, scribbled in red pen. He said if I told anyone, it wouldn't just be me, it'd be Ruth, too. Avery's mind reeled. Daniel had never mentioned threatening Ruth. So who had? They looked at each other, the same question in both their eyes. Who else was there that night? The answers were coming. Avery could feel it, but so was something else, something darker. The kind of truth that doesn't sleep quietly. That night, back at her apartment, Avery sat with the diary open. Under a reading lamp, she flipped back to the first page. And saw a name scribbled in tiny, faint pencil, one she hadn't heard before. T. Calloway. No explanation. Just the name. It wasn't in any of Elise's known contacts. It wasn't in the town records. And Daniel never mentioned anyone by that name. Avery reached for her phone. The investigation wasn't over. Something had been buried deeper than Elise, and now it was clawing its way out. The name was barely visible. T. Calloway written in pencil, pressed into the upper margin of Elise's diary's first page. No date, no context. Just a name hanging in shadow. Detective Avery stared at it under the desk lamp. The pencil stroke worn thin with time. She took a deep breath and circled the name in red ink. She flipped through every page. Elise never mentioned that name again, not in the entries, not in the back cover, not in the doodles she sometimes made in the corners. Just once, like it was never meant to be found, Avery ran the name through every available database. No hits in Elise's phone records. No one in Daniel Morgan's known associates. No matching resident in the town registry of Marlow between 2000 and 2025. T. Calloway didn't exist, or they had gone to great lengths to disappear. She turned back to the diary. The ink had bled in places, but one line caught her attention. The man from the cemetery asked about Ruth today. She read it again, slowly. Elise had never mentioned a man from the cemetery before. Avery called Ruth immediately. Did Elise ever talk about someone near the cemetery? Man, maybe someone who asked about you. Silence. Then Ruth's voice came, uncertain. There was someone. Avery's pulse picked up. When? Years ago. Maybe 2010. Elise said he came to the church after a late service. Asked strange questions about me, about our family. Did she give a name? She only said he had cold eyes. Avery felt a chill run through her spine. What did he ask? Ruth hesitated. He wanted to know if Elise trusted her husband. The next morning, Avery requested access to the church's visitor logs and cemetery caretaker reports between 2009 and 2012. It was a long shot. Most records were either incomplete or handwritten in fading ink, but there it was, March 12, 2012. T. Calloway, Cemetery Research, Old Marlow Graves. Handwriting was rough, jagged. Avery snapped the photo. Now she had a date and a full name. She called in a favor with a contact at the state archives. Run background on A.T. Calloway. Male or female, any aliases, last known addresses. Connect them to Marlow, the church, or Daniel Morgan. Then she waited. That night, the nightmares came. In them, Avery saw Elise walking down the garden path again, just like in the photo Jonas had sent. But this time, someone else stood behind the trees. Not Daniel. Someone taller. Still. Watching. Avery jolted awake. The next morning, the call came through. The voice on the other end was grim. "We found a match." Avery sat up straighter. "Who?" "Thomas Calloway. Age 62. Lived in Marlow between 2007 and 2013. Taught part-time history at the community college. No criminal record, but something's off." "What?" "He changed his name legally in 2013. Moved to West Virginia. Name now reads Cal Thomas Wade." Avery's blood chilled. "Why change a name at 50? Exactly. Send me everything you've got." He hung up and stared at the wall. Cal Thomas Wade, a name carefully constructed to erase the past. But Elise hadn't forgotten him, even if it was just a name in a margin. That afternoon, she drove to the old college in town. The secretary pulled faded faculty files. Sure enough, Thomas Calloway, part-time lecturer, spring semesters only. Polite, reserved, no disciplinary history, taught history of American religion and secret societies. That made her stomach twist. What happened to him? He left after 2013. No one really noticed. Any connection to Daniel Morgan? The secretary paused. Then, he rented the same unit Daniel used to manage. I think Daniel handled the maintenance. Avery stood very still. What unit? 132 Mill Road. Avery drove straight there. The building was vacant now, condemned, its windows shattered. Vines curling through its broken bricks, but apartment 4B still had the number. Hanging crookedly from the door, she stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath her boots. The air was stale, untouched. She searched every cabinet, every drawer. Nothing. Then she checked under the floorboard behind the hallway closet, where tenants sometimes hid things, and found a box. Metal, heavy, locked. She picked it open with thin knife. Inside were photographs, not of Elise, but of Ruth. Dozens. Some taken outside the church, others near her old bookstore. One inside a diner, through a glass window. Avery's breath hitched. The timestamps ranged from 2009 to 2012. She flipped through them. One had Elise in the corner, blurry, stepping into frame. She turned it over. Nothing written, except the faint imprint of something, a press note that had once laid atop the photo. She scanned the bottom of the box, a scrap of paper tucked beneath the lining. He doesn't know I exist, but she does, and she's watching. Avery stepped back from the box, her heart pounding. Thomas Calloway had been obsessed with Ruth, and Elise knew, which meant Elise had been keeping more secrets than anyone realized. She wasn't just afraid of Daniel. She was protecting Ruth from someone else. Someone she thought was dangerous, someone watching from the trees, back at the station. Avery laid everything out. Photos, note, visitor log, name change. It all pointed in one direction. Someone had been circling their lives long before Daniel snapped, but no one had noticed, because they were all looking in the wrong direction. She picked up the phone and called Ruth. "There's something I need to show you." Ruth's voice was quiet. "What now?" Someone else was watching, and I think he might still be out there. He stood at the edge of the garden, just past the reach of the morning light, a tall figure, still and silent, watching the wind move through the broken trees. No one noticed him at first. Not Ruth. Not the volunteers laying fresh flowers, but Detective. Avery saw him. Something about the way he didn't move, didn't blink. The same presence she had imagined in Elise's diary entries. The one hiding behind the whisper of leaves. The cold breath of paranoia Elise had tried to write down. Barry. Avery walked toward him, slowly. He didn't run. His eyes met hers, pale and distant. "I wondered when you'd come back," she said. The man said nothing, but something flickered in his gaze. Not fear, not guilt. Recognition. Double quotes. "Thomas Calloway," she said. His lips twitched. "That's not my name anymore. Doesn't matter." She stopped a feet from him. "You were watching Ruth." She never knew. Elise knew. His face hardened. She shouldn't have gotten involved. Avery felt the weight of every word. "You threatened her." "I warned her." She wrote your name in her diary. He looked away for the first time. "I never touched her," he said softly. "But you were there." His silence confirmed it. "You saw what happened in the garden," Avery said, "when Daniel snapped." Calloway didn't respond. "You could have stopped it." He looked up. "I thought he would just yell. I thought she'd get away, but she didn't." "No." He shifted his weight, suddenly fragile. "I buried my guilt," he said. "Same as Daniel buried her." Avery stared at him. "You think that makes you innocent?" "No," he said. "It makes me next." He didn't answer that. Instead, she stepped back and pulled out her phone. "I've got your prints, your alias, and your confession. I won't run. You already did." 2 squad cars rolled up behind them. As the officers approached, Ruth appeared near the gate. She saw him, and her face drained of color. It was him. The man Elise had feared, the one with the cold eyes. Calloway turned once toward her, lips parting like he might speak, but Ruth didn't need to hear it. She already knew what he'd taken. Not a life, but the chance to save one. As they cuffed him and led him away, the wind blew hard through the garden. A single ribbon tore from the fence and sailed across the grass. It wrapped around Avery's boot. White, faded. Written in a trembling hand. She was right. He was watching. Avery picked it up and tied it back to the gate. The town of Marlow would forget in time, but some things remain. Some gates never close.